Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Lena and I'm 25 years old. For most of my life, I was the designated screw-up, the one who was supposedly bad with money, while my younger sister, Sophie, could do no wrong. I never thought that the very label they used to hold me down would end up being the key to the most surreal and satisfying reversal of fortune imaginable, a family showdown that played out not over a dinner table, but in a corporate boardroom. It all started with a lie about my grandfather's trust and ended with me holding the fate of my father's career in my hands. Before I dive into the whole unbelievable story of how I went from the family disappointment to the one writing the checks, I want to hear from you. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you've ever been underestimated or made to feel small by the people who were supposed to build you up, go ahead and hit that like button, because I have a feeling this story will resonate with you. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you can join our community of people who believe in rewriting their own narratives. My story, the real story, begins in the quiet, carpeted hallways of my childhood home, a place where love was a currency and I was always in debt. The narrative that I was bad with money wasn't a conclusion my parents reached after some catastrophic financial blunder on my part. It was a pre-written label affixed to me before I even knew what a budget was. It was a convenient explanation for the disparity in their affection, a justification for the constant, glaring favoritism they showed my younger sister, Sophie. It was a story they told themselves so often that it became their gospel. I remember my 8th birthday. The air in our living room was thick with the scent of vanilla cake and melting wax. Sophie, who was only 6, was practically vibrating with excitement, even though the day was meant to be mine. My parents, Richard and Carol, sat on the sofa, their smiles aimed squarely at her, even as they directed me to open my gifts. My pile was modest. It contained sensible things, a sturdy pair of school shoes, a set of encyclopedias, and the main event, a large ceramic piggy bank shaped like a cartoonishly smug pig. My father held it up. "See, Lena, every dollar you save is a dollar you earn for your future. It's important you learn this now." He said it with the gravity of a man imparting ancient wisdom. "You're the practical one," my mother added, patting my head with a gesture that felt more like a dismissal than an affection. "You have a good head on your shoulders for this sort of thing." Then it was Sophie's turn, even though it wasn't her birthday. My parents called it a non-birthday present so she wouldn't feel left out. From behind the sofa, my father produced a gigantic box wrapped in shimmering pink paper. Inside was the Star Dreamer Celeste doll, a limited edition marvel with hand-stitched clothes and hair that supposedly changed color in the sun. It cost more than all of my sensible gifts combined. Sophie shrieked with a joy so pure it was almost violent, clutching the doll to her chest. "Oh darling," my mother cooed, her voice dripping with a honeyed sweetness I never heard directed at me. "She's just for looking at, remember. She's delicate, just like you." I looked from Sophie's delicate, expensive doll to my clunky, practical pig. I understood the lesson they were teaching me, but it had nothing to do with saving money. The lesson was that Sophie was delicate, a treasure to be admired and showered with gifts. I was practical, a workhorse who needed to learn the value of a dollar because no one was going to be handing them to me. The piggy bank felt less like a gift and more like a life sentence. This dynamic only intensified as we grew older. When I was 16, I got my first job bussing tables at a local diner. The work was grueling, the hours were long, and my shoes were perpetually sticky with spilled soda. But every greasy, crumpled dollar bill I tucked into my pocket felt like a victory. I was saving for a school-sponsored trip to Washington, D.C. I dreamed of seeing the monuments, of walking through the halls of the Smithsonian. It was the first big thing I was ever doing for myself, by myself. I kept my savings in a shoebox under my bed, a pathetic little hoard that represented months of hard work. I was 2/3 of the way to my goal when my mother came into my room one evening, her face a mask of manufactured distress. "Lena, honey, we have a little situation," she began, sitting on the edge of my bed. I knew that tone. It was the prelude to a request that was framed as a question but was, in fact, an order. "What's wrong?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Well, you know that band Sophie loves, Ethereal Echo. They announced a surprise concert in the city for this weekend. It's their last show before they go on hiatus, and Sophie is she's utterly devastated that she can't go. The tickets are almost sold out, and they're terribly expensive." I stared at her, saying nothing. I knew where this was going. "I know you've been saving," she continued, her eyes flicking towards the spot under my bed as if she had X-ray vision. "And It would mean the world to your sister. We'll pay you back, of course. First thing next month. Mom, that's my DC trip money, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The payment is due in 3 weeks. I know, she said, her voice soothing and utterly dismissive of my panic. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime thing for Sophie. She's so passionate about her music. You're so good at saving, you'll make it back in no time. You understand, don't you? You're the mature one. I didn't understand. I felt a hot, angry pressure behind my eyes, but arguing was pointless. It would only lead to a lecture about how selfish I was being, how I didn't care about my sister's happiness. So with a heart made of lead, I pulled out the shoebox. I counted out the amount she needed. The depletion of my savings felt like a physical wound. Of course the money was never paid back. When I brought it up the next month, my father sighed with theatrical weariness. Lena, things are a little tight right now. It was for your sister. Can't you let it go? It's just money. It wasn't just money. It was my trip. It was my work. It was my dream. I didn't go to Washington, D.C. I stayed home and saw Sophie's ecstatic photos from the concert all over her social media, captioned with #best night ever, #best parents ever. Each picture was a fresh stab of resentment. I learned another lesson that day. My hard work was just another family resource, to be tapped for Sophie's whims. My dreams were collateral damage. The only person who ever seemed to see me, truly see me, was my grandfather on my mother's side. Grandpa Thomas was a quiet man with kind eyes and hands that were calloused from a lifetime of carpentry. He didn't speak in grand pronouncements, but his presence was a balm. He smelled of sawdust and pipe tobacco, a scent I still associate with safety. While my parents praised Sophie's fleeting passions, Grandpa Thomas would sit with me at the kitchen table while I did my homework, asking me about history, about the books I was reading. Don't ever let them tell you that a curious mind isn't a valuable thing, Lena, he told me once, watching me diagram a complex sentence for my English class. Some people plant flowers because they're pretty to look at right now. Other people plant trees. It takes longer, you don't see the results right away, but one day, you've got shade and shelter for a lifetime. He smiled. You're a tree planter, my girl. On my 10th birthday, he gave me a small, intricately carved wooden puzzle box. It had no visible seams or hinges. The most valuable things aren't always the shiniest, Lena, he'd said, his voice a low rumble. Sometimes you have to look for the hidden mechanism. You have to be patient and clever. I spent weeks fiddling with that box, until I finally discovered the secret panel, and it clicked open. Inside, there was nothing but a single, perfectly polished acorn. I was confused at first, but then I remembered what he'd said about planting trees. I kept that acorn. It was a symbol of his faith in me, a silent testament to the potential he saw when everyone else saw a practical, unglamorous but useful child. Grandpa Thomas passed away when I was 12. He'd had a modest life, but he'd always been careful. My parents informed me, with an air of great magnanimity, that he had left a trust fund for each of his grandchildren, specifically to be used for our college education. The news was a lifeline. It meant I could escape. It meant I could maybe, just maybe, study something I loved, like history, at a good university. It was a seed he had planted for me, and I guarded the hope of it fiercely. When it came time to apply for colleges, the old dynamic resurfaced with a vengeance. I timidly brought up the idea of applying to a liberal arts college known for its history department. My father had scoffed. A history degree? Lena, be serious. What kind of job are you going to get with that? You'll be a barista with a mountain of debt. You need to study business or accounting. Something practical. Meanwhile, Sophie's doodles, which she'd taken to doing on expensive sketch pads my parents bought her, were treated like masterpieces. They were framed and hung in the hallway. Her vague interest in art was nurtured and celebrated. She has a true artist's soul, my mother would say to visitors, gesturing to a charcoal sketch of a wilting flower. We have to protect that. I ended up at a state school, commuting from home for the first 2 years to save money, dutifully majoring in business administration. It was a gray existence, a life of spreadsheets and marketing principles that felt as ill-fitting as a stranger's coat. But I did it because I was the practical one. I did it because my grandfather's trust fund was waiting for me, a promise of a future I would one day control. The day that promise was shattered is burned into my memory with the clarity of a flashbulb. I was 22, about to start my junior year. the year I would finally move onto campus. My parents called a family meeting in the living room. The air was heavy and solemn. Sophie was there, perched on the arm of the sofa, looking uncharacteristically nervous. My father cleared his throat, a sound like gravel turning over. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the wall, just over my head. Lena, there's something we need to tell you. My mother reached out and took his hand. We've had some financial difficulties. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. What kind of difficulties? My father finally looked at me, his expression a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. It's about your grandfather's trust, the one for your college. He took a deep breath. Lena, it's gone. The word hung in the air, an impossible alien thing. Gone. How could it be gone? It was in a trust. It was protected. What do you mean gone? I asked, my voice shaking. The market, it's been so unpredictable these last few years, he mumbled, waving a vague hand. I made some investments on behalf of the trust. I thought I could grow it, make it worth more for you. It was a sure thing, everyone said so. But it went south. It all went south. We lost everything in that account, Lena. I am so sorry. We did our best, my mother chimed in, her voice quivering with what I now recognize as performance. You know your father isn't a financial wizard. He was only trying to help you. The blame was deftly deflected, painting him as a well-meaning victim of circumstance. I was reeling, the floor seeming to tilt beneath me. The dream I had nurtured for a decade had just evaporated. The escape hatch was gone. All I could see was an endless future of practical choices and suffocating sensibility. But the worst was yet to come. My mother squeezed my father's hand and put on a brave face. But there is some good news. We didn't want to let all our dreams for you children die. I looked at her, confused. What good news could there possibly be? We've been saving for years, she said, her voice swelling with pride. And we've decided to use our nest egg to give Sophie the chance of a lifetime. She's been accepted into the Paris College of Art, one of the most prestigious art schools in the world. Sophie finally looked at me, a flicker of guilt in her eyes, before it was stamped out by a blaze of excitement. It's in Paris, Lena, for painting. I stared at them, my mind struggling to process the whiplash. My trust fund, my future was gone, lost to bad investments. And in the same breath, they were announcing they had enough money to send my sister to an obscenely expensive private art school in Paris. This is Sophie's dream, my father said, his voice firm now, as if my own dreams were not even a factor in the equation. An opportunity like this doesn't come along twice. We knew you'd understand, Lena. You're so practical, you'll find a way, you always do. They had weaponized the very quality they'd forced upon me. My practicality was now my burden, my punishment. It was the excuse they used to sacrifice my future for hers. I looked at Sophie, who was now beaming, the guilt forgotten. I looked at my parents, their faces alight with vicarious joy over their precious, delicate artist. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it turned to ice. It was the silent, chilling realization that I was utterly and completely alone. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just nodded, the motion feeling disconnected from my body. The last stubborn tendril of hope that I could ever earn their approval, that they would one day see my worth, withered and died. The story they had written for me was complete. I was the responsible one, the practical one, the one who would step aside and understand. And I had just played my part perfectly. The weeks following the disastrous announcement were a special kind of hell. To save money, a phrase that now felt like a cruel joke, I had to move back into my childhood bedroom. The house, which had always felt like Sophie's territory, was now a full-blown shrine to her impending Parisian adventure. The dining room table was buried under a mountain of glossy brochures for study abroad programs, swatches of fabric for her new bohemian wardrobe, and lists of expensive imported art supplies. Every conversation was a breathless discussion of flight deals, visa applications, and the charming little arrondissement where Sophie might live. I became a ghost in my own home. My presence was an inconvenience, a quiet, gloomy reminder of the sacrifice that had made all this joy possible. My parents would speak to me in gentle, condescending tones, as if I were a convalescing patient. "Are you doing okay, sweetie?" My mother would ask, without waiting for an answer before turning to Sophie to ask, "Now, do you think you'll need linen canvas or cotton duck for your oil painting class?" The label of being bad with money had now morphed into something more pitiful. I was the one whose future had been gambled away, so I was treated with a cloying mixture of pity and impatience. My father, the man who had supposedly lost my inheritance, avoided me entirely. If we passed in the hallway, he would suddenly find something fascinating on the wall to look at. He couldn't face the walking, talking evidence of his failure, or as I would later learn, his deception. It was during this period of suffocating invisibility that my mother assigned me a task. "Lena dear," she said one afternoon, finding me reading in my room. "Since you have so much time on your hands before the semester starts up again, it would be a tremendous help if you could clean out the old filing cabinets in the study. They're an absolute disaster, and your father just never gets around to it." The condescension was a physical thing, a thick, cloying syrup in her voice. "Since you have so much time on your hands," because my plans had been obliterated, because my life was now a void they had created. I wanted to scream, to refuse, to throw the book I was holding against the wall, but I didn't. The ice that had formed in my chest during that family meeting had solidified into a strange detached calm. Arguing was a waste of energy, so I simply said, "Okay, Mom." The study was my father's domain, a room that smelled of stale coffee and leather. The two tall beige filing cabinets stood against the wall like rusty soldiers. They were crammed with decades of forgotten paperwork, old utility bills, car maintenance records, instruction manuals for appliances we no longer owned. It was a tedious, mind-numbing task, a perfect punishment for the daughter whose ambition had been deemed impractical. I spent 2 days emptying the cabinets, sorting papers into keep and trash piles. My back ached and my fingers were smudged with ink and gray with dust. I was on the last drawer of the second cabinet, a drawer that was stuck fast. I had to jiggle it and pull with all my weight until it finally screeched open. It was a graveyard of the truly forgotten. Deep in the back, behind a stack of my father's college transcripts, was a thick, brown accordion file. It was brittle with age, and the label on the tab, written in my grandfather's spidery, elegant handwriting, said simply, "Old Grandpa." My heart gave a little thump. Anything related to Grandpa Thomas was precious. I pulled it out and set it on the floor, opening the creaking clasps. It was mostly what I expected: old tax returns from the 1980s, his honorable discharge papers from the Army, the deed to his old house. But tucked into the very last sleeve was something different. It was a large vellum envelope, thick and stiff. My full name, Lena Marie Thompson, was typed on the front in a crisp, old-fashioned font. My breath hitched. I'd never seen it before. With trembling fingers, I tore open the seal. Inside were several large, ornately printed documents. They looked important, official. At the top of each, in bold lettering, was the name Innovate Tick. Below that, it said Certificate of Common Stock. They were stock certificates. They certified that a certain number of shares in this Innovate Tech company were held by Thomas Miller, my grandfather, in trust for the beneficiary, Lena Marie Thompson. I frowned, confused. Innovate Tick. The name meant nothing to me. Weren't these the bad investments my father had talked about, the ones that were now worthless? Tucked in with the certificates was a small folded piece of notepaper. It was a handwritten note from my grandfather. "My clever Lena," it began, and my eyes immediately welled with tears. "Always look for the hidden value. This one's a long shot, a little tech company with a big idea, but I have a good feeling about it. Your parents are good people, but they see the world in black and white. You, my girl, see the colors. This is for your future, your rules. Love, Grandpa." I clutched the note to my chest, a fresh wave of grief and love washing over me. He had tried to provide for me. He had tried to give me my own rules, but my father had lost it all. I looked at the certificates again. They were probably just relics now, a painful reminder of what could have been. I almost put them in the trash pile, but my grandfather's words echoed in my head. Always look for the hidden value. On a whim, I slipped the envelope into my pocket. Later that evening, after my parents had gone to bed, I sat in front of my laptop in the dark kitchen. The only light was the screen's glow, illuminating my face. With a strange sense of performing a final useless ritual, I typed Innovate into the search bar. The results were instantaneous and overwhelming. My jaw literally dropped. Innovate wasn't some defunct, long-forgotten startup. The name had been changed years ago, after a massive merger. The company was now called Innovate Solutions, and it was a global tech behemoth. They designed the microprocessors that were in almost every smartphone and computer on the planet. Their stock symbol scrolled across the bottom of every financial news network. They were a giant. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. This couldn't be right. My father had said the investment was a bust. He'd said it was all gone. I clicked on the About Us section of the company's website, then on the leadership page. My blood ran cold. There, smiling out from a professionally lit corporate headshot, was my father, Richard Thompson, Senior Vice President of Operations. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. He had worked at Innovate Solutions for the past 15 years. He hadn't just joined recently. He was a senior executive. He had been there through the merger, the rebranding, the explosive growth. He would have been intimately familiar with the company's history, its major investors, its IPO. It was impossible for him not to know about the value of founding shares. Absolutely impossible. The lie was so colossal, so audacious, it took my breath away. He hadn't lost my trust fund in bad investments. He had hidden it. He had known about these shares, forgotten in a dusty file, and had simply chosen to pretend they didn't exist. He had let me believe my future was worthless, while he built his career at the very company that was supposed to fund it. And then he and my mother had used their own money they could have used to help me, to fund Sophie's dream, all while playing the part of grieving parents who had lost my inheritance. The ice in my chest shattered, replaced by a volcanic, white-hot rage. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I needed to know what this all meant. I couldn't trust myself to think clearly. My mind immediately went to Mark, a friend from my first year of college. We weren't super close, but we'd been in a study group together. He was sharp, kind, and had gone on to work for a big financial firm in the city. He was the only person I knew who would understand this stuff. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely dial his number. It was late, but he picked up on the second ring. "Lena, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Mark, I'm so sorry to call so late, but I need your help," I stammered, my voice cracking. "I found something, some old stock certificates. I don't know what they mean." I read him the information from the certificates. The company name, Innovate Tech, the number of shares, the issue date. He was quiet for a moment. Innovate Tech, he repeated slowly, as in the original name for Innovate Tech Solutions. Wow, okay, that's old school. Let me make some calls in the morning. These old physical certificates can be tricky. Don't do anything. Don't talk to anyone about this, especially not your family. You hear me, Lena? Not a word. His serious tone scared me and calmed me at the same time. I promised I wouldn't. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I went through the motions, acting the part of the dutiful, directionless daughter. I finished cleaning the study. I sat through another dinner of Sophie worship. All the while, the vellum envelope felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket, a secret sun that was about to go supernova. Mark called back the next evening. I answered on the first ring, my heart in my throat. "Lena," he said, and his voice was completely different. It was a hushed, reverent whisper filled with awe. "Are you sitting down?" "Yes," I lied, pacing frantically in my bedroom. "Okay." I had to go through some deep archives, and I had a friend in our legal department pull the original incorporation documents and IPO filings for Innovate Tech. "Lena, I don't know how to tell you this." He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "Your grandfather wasn't just an early investor. He was one of the first angel investors. He bought in when the company was literally 3 guys in a garage." "Okay," I said, not understanding. "The number of shares on your certificates, it looks small, but this was pre-IPO, pre-everything. Those shares have split multiple times over the decades. A 2-for-1 split here, a 3-for-1 there. They've compounded. It's like planting one acorn and coming back 30 years later to find a whole forest." He paused again, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Lena, the shares your grandfather left you, the ones your father said were worthless, they haven't just matured, they've metastasized. They're worth a fortune, a staggering amount of money." I sank onto my bed, my legs giving out. I felt lightheaded. How much?" Mark let out a short, hysterical laugh. "That's not even the craziest part. Because of the class of shares they are, founding shares, they carry more voting rights. Lena, forget the monetary value for a second. That block of stock, it's the single largest individual holding in the entire company. It represents a 51% stake." I didn't understand the term. What does that mean? A 51% stake? There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. Then Mark said the words that would change my entire world. "It means you're the majority shareholder, Lena. It means you don't just have money, you have control. You basically own Innovate Solutions. You own the company your dad works for." The first few days after Mark's revelation were a blur. I existed in a state of suspended reality, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. The sheer scale of it all was incomprehensible. Me, Lena Thompson, the practical one, the one who was bad with money, was now on paper one of the most powerful figures in the global tech industry. The irony was so profound it was almost sickening. I would oscillate between moments of dizzying, terrifying power and crippling self-doubt. Who was I to handle something like this? My parents had spent my entire life convincing me I was incompetent, and a part of me, a deep wounded part, still believed them. But then the anger would return, a cold, clarifying rage that burned away the fear. Every time I looked at my father, sitting at the dinner table talking about his stressful day at the office, I felt a fresh wave of betrayal. He was a fraud, living a comfortable life, built on a lie that had cost me my own aspirations. He had watched me grieve for a future he had personally stolen and hidden away. My mother, in her blissful ignorance or willful complicity, continued to plan Sophie's Parisian fantasy, every excited squeal a fresh insult. It was my grandfather's note that became my anchor. "Your future, your rules." He hadn't just left me money, he had left me a choice. He had left me agency. It could let the fear win, quietly cash out a fraction of the shares, and disappear. Or I could do what he knew I was capable of. I could be clever. I could look for the hidden mechanism. I could plant a tree. I met with Mark again, and this time he brought someone with him. A woman named Evelyn Reed. She was a partner at a top corporate law firm, sharp and impeccably dressed, with eyes that missed nothing. She didn't treat me like a confused girl who'd stumbled into a fortune. She treated me like a client. She spoke to me with a directness and respect that I had never experienced from my own family. For 1 week, we worked out of a small, discreet conference room in her downtown office. Evelyn and her team moved with terrifying efficiency. They verified the provenance of the certificates, a process that involved tracking down dusty municipal records and corporate filings. They established an ironclad chain of custody, proving my identity and my rights as the sole beneficiary of the trust. They drew up the necessary legal documents to formally claim my shares and transfer the voting rights to my name. With every document I signed, with every complex legal concept Evelyn patiently explained, I felt a piece of the old timid Lena sloughing away. The girl who was afraid to ask for her own savings back from her mother was being replaced by a woman who was about to take control of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I was learning a new language, the language of power, of proxies and shareholder resolutions. I was becoming the person my grandfather believed I could be. The plan we devised was simple, elegant, and brutal. Evelyn discovered that the Innovate Solutions annual general meeting for shareholders was scheduled for the following week. It was the perfect stage, public, official, and a place where my father would be at his most confident, his most performative. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of the mirror in the hotel suite Evelyn had booked for me. I was wearing a dark navy blue suit, tailored to fit me perfectly. It was a suit of armor. My hair was pulled back in a severe professional knot. The reflection staring back at me was a stranger, a woman I didn't recognize, but one I desperately wanted to become. There were no traces of the heartbroken girl in the dusty study. This woman had a purpose. Evelyn and I rode to the convention center in a black town car. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. I took a deep breath. "No, but it doesn't matter. It has to be done. Just remember," she said, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror, "today you are not their daughter. You are not their sister. You are the majority shareholder. That is the only identity that matters in that room." The auditorium was vast, a sea of dark suits and hushed, important voices. On the stage, under bright lights, sat the board of directors and the senior executive team. And there, in the center of the panel, was my father. He looked regal and self-assured, laughing at a joke the CEO made. In the front row I saw my mother, gazing up at him with pure adoration. She was wearing a new dress for the occasion. They were completely oblivious, cocooned in their world of comfortable lies. They had no idea a predator was in their midst. Evelyn and I took our seats in a reserved section near the front, just off to the side. We were invisible. The meeting droned on with financial reports and projections. I watched my father as he delivered his presentation on operational efficiency. He was smooth, confident, using corporate jargon like a shield. He spoke of maximizing value and leveraging assets. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. He was a hypocrite of staggering proportions. Finally, the floor was opened for the Conda session. This was our moment. As a pre-selected executive from a hedge fund asked a softball question, Evelyn calmly stood up. She didn't shout. Her voice cut through the auditorium's murmur with practiced precision. "A procedural point, Mr. Chairman," she said, addressing the man at the head of the table. The chairman, a portly man named Arthur Vance, looked taken aback by the interruption. "Excuse me, this is the shareholder Conda. Please state your name and affiliation." "Evelyn Reed, of Reed, Adler and Finch," she said, "and I must insist on this point of order. According to Corporate Bylaw 7.4, all votes and resolutions passed today are invalid, unless the credentials of all major shareholders present are verified, and I'm afraid our records show a significant change in ownership that has not been acknowledged by the board." A confused murmur rippled through the room. Vance looked to the corporate secretary, who just shrugged, bewildered. "All of our major institutional shareholders are accounted for, Miss Reed," the chairman said with a hint of annoyance. Evelyn smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "I'm not talking about an institutional shareholder." She then turned and gestured with a slow, deliberate movement, directly at me. "Representing the trust established by the late Thomas Miller, which holds the founding shares block, I would like to introduce the board to the new, undisputed majority shareholder of Innovimig Solutions." I stood up. The silence in the room was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out. Hundreds of heads swiveled in my direction, and on the stage, my father stared. His face, a moment before so smug and confident, seemed to melt. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty gray mask of disbelief. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked from me to Evelyn and back again, his mind visibly short-circuiting as it tried to process the impossible. In the front row, my mother's adoring smile froze and then crumbled. Her eyes darted around, trying to understand the sudden shift in the atmosphere, and then they locked onto mine. Her expression was one of pure, uncomprehending shock. I walked from my seat to the aisle and then towards the small podium set up for shareholder questions. Every footstep echoed in the cavernous silence. I felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on me, but I only saw one person, my father. I reached the microphone and looked directly at him. My voice when I spoke was perfectly calm, perfectly steady. It was a voice he had never heard before. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Lena Thompson." I let the name hang in the air for a moment. I saw the flicker of recognition and terror in the eyes of the other board members who knew him. "As the new majority shareholder," I continued, my voice betraying no emotion, "my first official act is to call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current executive leadership. Specifically, I am tabling a motion for the immediate removal of the Senior Vice President of Operations, Richard Thompson." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. My father looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. I wasn't finished. "This motion is based on gross mismanagement of a personal trust under his care, and a profound, multi-decade conflict of interest that calls his professional ethics and judgment into serious question." The chairman, Arthur Vance, looked utterly stunned, but he was also a creature of corporate governance. He saw Evelyn standing there, a shark in a tailored suit, and he saw the look on my face. He knew this was not a prank, it was a coup. "A vote has been called for," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "All in favor of the motion to remove Richard Thompson from his position as Senior Vice President." Evelyn's voice rang out, clear and final. "The majority shareholder votes aye." It was over in an instant. The vote was a formality. My 51% was absolute. Vance swallowed hard, looking at my father with a mixture of pity and fear. "The motion carries," he announced, his voice barely a whisper. "Richard Thompson is hereby removed from his position and his seat on this board, effective immediately." Two uniformed security guards, who had been standing discreetly by the walls, moved towards the stage. They walked up to my father, who was still frozen in his chair, and spoke to him in low voices. He was being escorted from the stage. He was being escorted out of his life. As he passed, his eyes met mine. They were filled not with anger, but with a horrifying hollow emptiness. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, In the front row, my mother finally broke. She shot to her feet, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Lena," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Lena, what have you done? This is your father. You're destroying this family." She tried to rush towards me, to get past the aisle, but a security guard gently but firmly blocked her path. I looked at her, at this woman who had co-authored my entire life of being less than. I felt a strange cold pity for her. I leaned back into the microphone, my voice still quiet, but now it carried across the entire silent room. "I did what you both taught me, Mother," I said, my words dropping like stones into a deep well. I was being practical. This was a bad investment. The ride back to my parents' house was silent. My mother sat in the passenger seat of my car, rigid and staring straight ahead, her face a thunderous mask of fury. She hadn't spoken a single word to me since she'd been escorted out of the auditorium. The silence was thick with unspoken accusations, with the shrapnel of a life that had been blown apart. When we pulled into the driveway, she got out and slammed the door so hard the whole car shook. The house felt like a tomb. My father was in the living room, sitting in his favorite leather armchair, but he seemed to have shrunk. The confident, important executive was gone, replaced by a gray, hollowed-out old man, staring at nothing. He didn't even look up when we entered. The air was heavy, suffocating. My mother finally exploded. The torrent of rage and recrimination I had been expecting was unleashed. "Are you happy now?" she screamed, her voice raw. "Are you satisfied? You've ruined him. You've ruined this family. For what? For some forgotten dusty old piece of paper. After everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "What, exactly, have you done for me? You told me my future was worthless. You stood by and watched him lie to my face for years. He was trying to protect you," she shrieked. "The money was complicated. He didn't want to burden you. Protect me. He stole from me. He stole my grandfather's legacy and my future, and he did it so he could feel important, and so you could spoil Sophie. That's not protection, Mom. That's theft. You have no idea what you're talking about," she sobbed, collapsing onto the sofa. "He's a good man. You've destroyed a good man." I looked from her weeping form to my father's empty shell. There was no remorse in them, only self-pity and anger that their comfortable world had been upended. There was nothing more to say. I turned and walked out, leaving them to drown in the silence they had created. The next day, the inevitable call came. It was Sophie, her voice frantic and laced with panic, calling from Paris. "Lena, what is going on?" she cried, her words tumbling over each other. "The school just called me. They said the check for my tuition bounced. The payment for my student housing was declined. They're saying if it's not paid in full by the end of the week, I'm unenrolled. Mom called me. She was hysterical. She said you did something terrible to Dad." I listened patiently, letting her vent her fear and confusion. She was a casualty in this, but she was also a part of the system that had been oppressing me. "Sophie, calm down," I said, my voice even. "I'm coming to see you. I'm booking a flight now. We'll sort this out." "Coming here? Why?" "Because we need to talk. Face to face. I'll be there tomorrow." I hung up before she could argue. 24 hours later, I was standing in a cold, drizzly Parisian street, looking for her address. The glamorous life I had imagined for her was a fiction. The school had already kicked her out of her dorm. I found her in a tiny, depressing sublet that smelled of damp and turpentine. The floor was littered with half-finished canvases and takeout containers. She looked small and lost, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. The moment she saw me, her fear turned to anger. "What did you do?" she demanded, her hands on her hips. "You got Dad fired. You cut off our money. Are you trying to ruin my life just because you're jealous?" The accusation, after everything, was so absurd it didn't even sting. I calmly set my bag down on the only clean chair. I pulled out a folder I had prepared. "Sit down, Sophie," I said. It wasn't a request. She hesitated, then reluctantly sank onto her lumpy mattress. I walked her through it, step by step. I told her about Grandpa Thomas's trust fund, my trust fund. I told her about the lie my father had told. I told her about the filing cabinet and the note. Then I laid the documents on the bed in front of her, copies of the stock certificates with my name on them, a copy of my grandfather's note, and the bank statements from the trust account showing a zero balance for the last decade. "That money," I said, pointing to the documents, The money that was supposed to pay for my college, my future, anything I wanted to do. That's the money Dad said he lost. He didn't lose it, Sophie. He hid it. He lied about it so he wouldn't have to deal with it. I let that sink in. Her face was pale, her eyes wide as she stared at the papers. The money Mom and Dad used to send you here, I continued gently. The money for your tuition, your art supplies, your dream. It wasn't some grand sacrifice from their savings. It was a choice. They chose to fund your dream after they had already erased mine. Sophie looked up at me, her face a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. I didn't know, she whispered. Lena, I swear I had no idea. I know you didn't, I said, and for the first time, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She had been a pawn too, the gilded piece in their game. You were just playing the part they wrote for you, the delicate artist, just like I was playing the part of the practical screw-up. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound her quiet sobs. The truth, ugly and raw, lay between us. Finally I spoke again. I'm going to make you an offer, Sophie. She looked up, her expression wary. I will pay for your entire education, I said. I will pay for this semester, and every semester until you graduate. I'll get you a proper apartment, not this dump. I'll buy you all the linen canvas and expensive paint you could ever want. I want you to have your dream. I'm not the monster Mom is making me out to be. Relief washed over her face, but I held up a hand. But there is one condition. It's not negotiable. What is it? She asked, her voice small. When you come home for the summer, you are going to enroll in a financial literacy course, and I'm going to take it with you. We are going to learn, together, everything that Dad should have taught us. We're going to learn about budgeting, about investing, about reading a contract, about securing our own futures. No more being bad with money, no more being kept in the dark by anyone, ever again. We're going to be the ones who write the rules from now on. Sophie stared at me, her tears slowing. She saw the seriousness in my eyes, the unshakable resolve. She was being offered her dream, but on new terms, terms of equality, of shared knowledge, of mutual respect. It was a future she had never imagined, one where she wasn't just the coddled artist, but a capable woman in her own right. She slowly nodded, a ghost of a smile, touching her lips. Okay, Lena, she whispered. Okay. In that dingy, damp Parisian apartment, amidst the ruins of our family's lies, my sister and I finally began to build something true. Sophie's agreement was the first fragile stitch in repairing a lifetime of carefully engineered distance between us. The financial literacy course that summer was excruciatingly awkward at first. We sat side by side in a brightly lit classroom at the local community college, surrounded by recent high school graduates and young couples planning their first home purchase. Sophie was sullen and resistant for the first week, doodling defiant, spiky-looking flowers in her notebook, a passive protest against this perceived punishment. I remained patient, doing the homework for both of us initially, sliding my completed worksheets onto her side of the table without comment. The shift happened during a lesson on reading investment prospectuses. The instructor was explaining the concept of fiduciary duty, the legal and ethical obligation of one party to act in the best interest of another. He used the example of a trustee managing a beneficiary's account. As he described the potential for malfeasance, for conflicts of interest, for an abuse of trust, Sophie went utterly still. Her pen stopped moving. She slowly looked up from her notebook, and her eyes met mine across the small table. In that moment, the full legal and moral weight of what our father had done, or rather failed to do, crashed down on her. It was no longer just a family drama, it was a definable textbook betrayal. From that day on, she changed. She started asking questions, sharp and insightful ones. She started taking her own notes. We began talking after class, first about compound interest and retirement accounts, and then slowly, tentatively, about our childhoods. We compared memories, holding them up to the light of our new understanding. We saw how every sensible gift I received, and every delicate treasure she was given, was part of a larger insidious narrative designed to control us both. We were unlearning our parents' lessons, and learning a new language together, a language of self-sufficiency and mutual support. 2 years flew by. I didn't return to my business administration degree. Instead, I embraced my new role with a ferocity I never knew I possessed. I wasn't just the majority shareholder. I became the chairwoman of the board at Innovate Solutions. I took my grandfather's advice to heart. I wasn't a flower, pretty to look at. I was a tree planter. I didn't involve myself in the day-to-day engineering, but I reshaped the company's culture. I established the Thomas Miller Foundation, a major corporate initiative dedicated to funding financial literacy and entrepreneurship programs for young women in underserved communities. I was good at it. I was clear-headed, fair, and I saw the hidden value in people and ideas that others overlooked. My practicality, once a weapon used against me, became my greatest asset. Sophie, meanwhile, blossomed in Paris, with her future secured by funds that were now rightfully hers. A trust managed by a third-party firm, not family. She was free to focus on her art, but the lessons from that summer classroom had taken root. She finished her degree with honors, a brilliant and talented painter. But she wasn't just an artist anymore. She was a business owner. She used a portion of her trust to open a small, independent art gallery in her neighborhood, a space dedicated to showcasing the work of other young, emerging artists. She negotiated her own lease, managed her own payroll, and learned to read a profit and loss statement with the same acuity she used to critique a brushstroke. She and I were no longer planets in separate orbits. We were allies, bound by a shared past and a co-authored future. We spoke on the phone every week, our conversations a comfortable mix of corporate strategy and artistic theory. As for our parents, their world had shrunk dramatically. My father never worked in a corporate environment again. His public removal from Innovate had made him unemployable at that level. They had to sell the large house I grew up in and move to a modest condominium across town. They lived a quiet, much-reduced life, a life stripped of the prestige my father had coveted and the material excess my mother had used to measure her worth. For the first year, my mother's calls were filled with guilt trips and subtle pleas for a handout, which I politely but firmly refused. Then, about 18 months after the shareholder meeting, my mother called and asked to meet me for coffee. She looked older, tired. The anger had finally burned out of her, leaving behind something that looked like weary acceptance. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, stirring her latte for a long time without drinking it. "About your piggy bank, about Sophie's doll." I said nothing, just waited. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she whispered, her voice thick. "I thought I was preparing you for a hard life and protecting her from one. I see now. I just made your life harder than it had to be, and I made her weak. I'm sorry, Lena, for my part in all of it. I truly am." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real. It was the first truly honest thing she had said to me in years. Our relationship would never be the warm, loving bond I had once craved, but the toxicity was gone. It became a relationship of polite distance, of boundaries that were respected. It was enough. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in the quiet of my office, looking out over the city skyline, I pull the polished acorn my grandfather gave me out of my desk drawer. It's a simple, small thing, but it holds the entire journey within it. I was told I was bad with money, but the truth is, my family was bad with trust. They were careless with my heart, my dreams, and my potential. The greatest return on my grandfather's investment was never about the stock splits or the monetary value. It was the power it gave me to find the hidden mechanism within myself, to reclaim my own story, and to use it to build a real, unshakable future, not just for myself, but with the sister I finally got to know. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's been a long and complicated road, but one I'm grateful for. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you realized the story someone else had written for you was completely wrong? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe there's so much power in sharing our truths. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and please subscribe for more stories about finding your strength and rewriting your own rules. Remember, your value is not determined by how others see you, but by how you choose to see yourself. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I wish you all the strength in the world.